The Billionaire's Convenient Wife. A possessive, billionaire romance. Layla Simmons. For everyone who only ever got to be the useful one, and never once believed they could be wanted for nothing at all. You can. You are. Chapter 1. The trick to a perfect night, Sloane Avery had learned, was to fall apart only in the rooms no guest would ever see. She stood in the service corridor behind the St. Regis ballroom, with a clipboard pressed to her chest like a breastplate. Through the doors, 400 of the most powerful people in the city believed the evening had simply happened to them, that the orchids had arranged themselves, that the light had always fallen exactly that gold, that a generous universe had decided these particular people deserved a flawless night, and quietly provided one. The universe had nothing to do with it. Sloane had provided it, on 4 hours of sleep and a planning fee that had made her laugh out loud when the foundation first quoted it. It was more money than her scrappy little company had ever seen in a single night. "Table 6 wants the duck instead of the salmon," her runner said in her earpiece. "And the Admiral's wife is allergic to something. She won't say what. She just keeps saying something. Duck to 6. Plate the Admiral's wife the vegetarian, and tell the captain it was always the plan." Sloane was already moving. Confidence is the only reliable allergen-free option. Go. People said she had a gift for making the impossible look effortless. What none of them understood was that it wasn't a gift. It was a survival skill. You learned to make things look effortless, when the alternative was letting people watch how hard you were working not to drown. In the bag at her feet, behind the spare linens, the sewing kit, the 3 phone chargers, sat a manila envelope she had not been able to make look like anything at all. In the matter of the guardianship of June Avery, a minor. 12 days. The hearing was 12 days out. 12 days to turn herself into a person a family court judge would trust with a 14-year-old. And every single thing she'd built to prove she could be trusted with one. The company, the late nights, the weekends she handed to other people's happiest days, was the exact evidence the other side would use to take June away. The lawyer had told her so. Across a desk that smelled like burnt coffee and bad news. She works constantly, Marcus's lawyers would say. No stability, no partner, no real home. A child needs more than a big sister doing her best. A child needed June's mother. That was what a child actually needed. June's mother had been 4 years gone, so the field of available options had narrowed considerably. There she is. The woman who built heaven on a coffee break. Wren came through the swinging door in a dress the color of good wine, glowing the way people glow when the impossible thing they've built has somehow held. A year married now, and still unable to say my husband without the whole sentence lighting up from inside. Sloane. It's perfect. It's actually perfect. The flower arch made a 4-star general cry into his old-fashioned. That was the open bar. It was the arch. Wren caught her arm. It had been Wren who got her this job. Wren, whose Voices of the Neighborhood archive had opened in the spring, who'd hired a near-broke events company to stage the launch, then watched Sloane turn a county records office into something people wept in. "You did this for a building full of dead people's voices," Wren had said that night. "Let me hand you to people with actual money." "How are you?" Wren said now. "And don't say handled." "Handled," Sloane said. It was the word she used for the things she had not handled, could not handle, and was holding shut with both hands and her whole body. Wren's face did something complicated and knowing. She had her own history of holding things shut. But before she could push, a tall, silent man appeared at the edge of the ballroom doors. Without seeming to move at all, he settled into the exact line between Wren and the open room. He didn't crowd her. He just stood there. A wall that had chosen a side. "That's Dominic," Wren said, and her voice changed on the name the way a struck bell changes the air. "He does that. Puts himself between me and every door in the building. I used to think it was a control thing. Turns out it's just the only love language he came with. She squeezed Sloane's arm. Come find me later. I'll pour something into you, and you can lie about being fine until you believe it. She turned to go, then stopped, and looked around the great gold room with an expression Sloane couldn't read. Half fond, half spooked. You know Layla met Christopher in this exact room? 3 years ago. This same benefit. He saw her across the floor, and that was it. The poor woman never stood a chance. She shook her head. I'd be careful in here if I were you. These men walk into one gala and come out engaged. It's a documented hazard. And then she was gone, swept back into the bright noise on her husband's arm. Sloane stood alone for exactly one breath. She let herself feel the whole crushing weight of it. The hearing, June. The lease notice taped to the fridge, the lawyer's careful pity. Then she folded it small and tucked it away behind the linens, where no guest could see. Then she went back to work. She saw him from across the room, and her first thought, the professional one, was, that man is the best liar I have ever watched. He stood near the auction tables with a knot of people gathered close. A silver-haired woman in emeralds, a younger couple, a man she recognized from the financial pages. He held all of them at once, the way a conductor holds an orchestra. He laughed at something the emerald woman said, and the laugh climbed all the way to his eyes and crinkled them, and Sloane would have staked June's life on it, entirely manufactured. She knew, because manufacturing things that looked real was her whole trade. She built fake fairy tales for strangers for a living. She knew good work when she saw it. This was the best she'd ever seen. He was beautiful, in the deliberate, expensive way of men who had decided to be. Dark hair, a jaw you could sharpen a pencil on, a tuxedo that had clearly been grown around him rather than bought. He touched the emerald woman's elbow to land his point, and she leaned in, lit up. There it is, Sloane thought. That's the move. He's giving her exactly the thing she walked in here wanting. She felt the strange kinship of one illusionist watching another work a crowd. Then he looked up, straight at her, as though he'd felt her watching the seams. For 1 second, neither of them did the thing people do, the polite slide of the eyes away. He held her gaze across 100 feet of marble, and the thing in his face was not charm. Charm was what he'd been pouring over the emerald woman like warm syrup. This was the opposite. This was the look of a man who just realized one person in the room could see the wires, and was deciding, in real time, how he felt about that. Then the smile came back down over his face like a visor. Smooth. Warm. False. He tipped his head to her. A small private salute. Caught. Well done. And turned back to his orchestra. Who's that? Sloane asked her earpiece, before she decided to. Which? Said her runner. The one who looks like the cover of a magazine about ruining your life. A pause. Oh, that's Adrian Cole. He's basically the face of the whole brotherhood. Live-in defense. The Sentinel people. They underwrite half this benefit. He's the one who makes the money feel like a good deed. A beat. Why? Do we need something from him? No, Sloane thought. Absolutely not. I need a vegetarian plate at table 6, a husband inside 2 weeks, and an entirely different life. That man can provide exactly none of the 3. No, she said. Forget it. Watch the cake. It's been 40 minutes in a warm room, and I don't trust the buttercream. She did not look at Adrian Cole again. She was extremely disciplined about it, all the way through the auction, and the speeches, and the long elegant emptying of the room. And if she knew at the back of her neck exactly where he was the whole time, that he never once came near her, that he worked the entire floor, and somehow never crossed into her airspace, the way 2 magnets turned the wrong way, refuse each other, well, that was situational awareness. A planner had to know where everyone was. It was nearly 1 in the morning before the corridor was finally hers. The guests were gone. The kitchen was breaking down in a clatter of trays. June would be asleep. Or pretending. In the apartment they had 6 more weeks of lease on. The true crime podcast still going in her earbuds. Because she said the sound of strangers calmly narrating terrible things helped her not lie awake thinking about real ones. Sloane found a pocket of quiet behind a marble column, set her forehead against the cool of it, and called the one number she'd been dreading all night. "It's late," her lawyer said, instead of hello, which was an answer all by itself. "You said you'd know about the continuance. They won't grant it." Vane's lawyers want it heard fast, and the court wants its calendar clear. A breath. The costly kind. "I'm going to be straight with you. Because you pay me to be. As things stand, you're going to lose her." The marble was very cold against her forehead. "He doesn't even want her," Sloane said, and hated how thin it came out. "He never wanted either of us. He's doing this because Mom's policy paid out in June's name, and a guardian controls the account until she's 18. It's about the money. It's not about—" "I know. And none of that is what the hearing's about. The hearing is about which household looks more stable to a judge with 90 seconds and a full docket. He's got a wife. House in the right district. A tidy story about second chances. You've got a 1-bedroom you're about to lose, and a job that keeps you at a billionaire's gala at 1 in the morning." A pause. Not unkind. If you walked in there married, a settled home, somebody standing next to you, it's a different hearing entirely. Might be the only different hearing, but you'd have needed to do that months ago. And I don't advise clients to commit fraud. So, Sloane said. "Get some sleep. We'll fight it. I just won't lie to you about the odds." She didn't remember ending the call. She remembered standing very still with her forehead on the stone, doing the math she'd refused all week. The math where every column added up to a morning in which a man who had never once shown up for June got handed her. Because he'd remembered to buy a house in the correct district. She remembered the precise, scraped-out feeling of a woman entirely out of moves. If you walked in there, married. It wasn't a real thought. It was the kind of thing exhausted people think at 1 in the morning. The way you think I could just drive and never stop. You didn't do it. There was no one to do it with. The whole world was wall-to-wall with people who needed things from her. And not one of them was standing in a corridor offering to. "You should sit down," said a voice from the dark behind her. Easy. Low. Unhurried. "You've been holding your breath about a minute now. And I watched you keep 400 people alive tonight without once eating anything. So my professional read is that you're roughly 4 seconds from going down." Sloane turned. Adrian Cole leaned against the far column, bow tie undone, a glass of water in each hand, one already extended toward her, as though he'd known before she did that she'd need it. The visor was gone. Whatever was on his face now was the other thing. The uncharmed thing she'd caught for 1 second across the ballroom. "I wasn't eavesdropping," he said. Which meant he had been. "I came back here to not be charming at anyone for 30 seconds. You were already here." He nudged the water toward her, patient as a man coaxing a wary animal. "Drink that. And then, you can absolutely tell me to go drown in the flower arch. I think I might have a genuinely stupid idea that solves your whole problem." Sloane looked at the water she hadn't asked for, already waiting in his hand. At the man who faked everything, standing in a dark corridor with no charm on at all, telling her he'd overheard the worst night of her year and had an idea. "I don't know you," she said. "No," Adrian agreed. "That's the part that makes it work." Chapter 2. Adrian Cole had told 400 lies before the soup course, and not one of them had cost him a thing. He'd told the Admiral he looked well, generous. The man looked embalmed. He'd told the woman from the Veterans Foundation that her remarks had moved him, while the back of his mind reviewed a logistics report. He had stood in a ballroom full of people who manufactured the machinery of other people's worst days, and assured each of them, with a warm hand on the shoulder, that they were the good guys. And they had believed him. Because that was the job, and Adrian was extraordinarily good at the job. It was a clean division of labor. Christopher Levin had built the empire. Dominic Hale kept it breathing in the dark, with men who never came to parties, because parties demanded faces that didn't flinch. And Adrian stood in the light and made the money feel like virtue. Someone had to. He was the only brother who could do it for 6 straight hours without his eyes going flat and giving the game away. The others had come home from the war with scars. Adrian had come home with a smile that worked on anyone. It was its own kind of wound. No one had ever thought to count it. He knew this room too. That was the small private joke of the night. This was the St. Regis ballroom. This exact gold cage, where 3 years ago Christopher had looked across a crowded floor at a borrowed seat librarian and quietly decided to rearrange his entire armored life around her. Adrian had watched it happen from 20 feet away and thought his friend had lost his mind. He'd revised the opinion since. He'd watched them all go, one after another. The hardest, most barricaded men he knew, toppling like a line that had held for years, and finally let itself be overrun. He'd come to understand that he was simply built differently. You couldn't lose your mind over a woman across a ballroom if there was nothing behind the smile for her to reach. "You're doing the thing," Christopher said, appearing at his shoulder with the particular stillness of a man who'd been lethal for a living and never fully set it down. He watched the room the way he watched everything now. Soft at the dead center, where his wife was, granite everywhere else. The one where you smile so hard nobody notices you've left. "I'm right here. You're in Belgrade. I can see it from here." Christopher took a measured sip of something he wasn't really drinking. "The Vandermeer matter." How long? There it was. The actual reason Adrian was working a ballroom on 4 hours of sleep, instead of letting Dominic's people run it. "It's handled," Adrian said. "It's always handled. That isn't a number." It wasn't, because the number was bad. The number was 11 days. Then, his 36th birthday. Then a clause in a dead man's trust would close like a hand around the one thing he wanted and would never admit to wanting. The Vandermeers were old money in the way that meant the money had stopped being the point 2 centuries ago, and the name had become the entire religion. A family that had been marrying correctly and disowning incorrectly since before the city had streetlights. Adrian's mother had been a disowning. She'd loved the wrong man and kept the wrong baby, and the family had shut its doors on her so completely that the only inheritance Adrian ever got was a surname he wasn't allowed to use and a string of foster placements that ended the way placements ended. They had let his mother die outside the gate. They had never once looked at the boy. And then, old August Vandermeer, the grandfather who had personally signed the order to let her go, had died. And he'd discovered, the way the very old sometimes do, a late and useless appetite for tidiness. He'd left a trust. And inside the trust, a clause, because the dead leave conditions the way other people leave furniture. Adrian could have his mother's sealed share, her portion, her letters, the single box of a woman the family had erased from its history, if he married before his 36th birthday and stayed married through the trust's 1-year review. "Become the settled, respectable Vandermeer man I refuse to make you, and I'll hand you back the only person who ever loved you." Fail. And it all reverted to the cousins. The correct ones. The ones who'd been at the dinners. Who would put a dead woman's box in a storage unit and forget it there on purpose? It was, Adrian had thought when the lawyer first read it to him a year ago, an exquisitely engineered cruelty. The family had finally offered him belonging and priced it at the one performance he was sure he couldn't give. A smile you could fake to a ballroom. A wife you could not fake across a breakfast table for a year, to a trustee paid to find the seam. He'd had a year to handle it. He had handled it, with the full genius of a man who handled everything, by not handling it at all, by charming, by stalling, by telling himself there was time. Because the one direction the boy who learned to perform warmth could never make himself walk was toward a thing that could be given to him, and then taken away again. "You're down to days," Christopher said quietly, which meant he knew the number was bad too. "Worry about your own catastrophe before you read tea leaves about the rest of us." "I'll handle it," Adrian said. "I always handle it." "You keep saying that." Christopher's gaze stayed level. "Say it one more time, and I'll start to worry." "It's the kind of thing I handle, so you don't have to." Which was the wall Adrian kept between the Brotherhood and the part of this that had an actual knife in it. The box, the letters, the mother. They knew there was a clause. They'd watched him dodge it for a year. They did not know what was inside it, or what it cost him to look. He let them believe it was money, and inconvenience, and old family theater. It was the most useful lie he owned. And he told it, like all his best ones, to the only people on earth he loved. Christopher studied him a beat longer than Adrian liked, then let it go, because Layla had appeared at the edge of the floor, and the granite went soft, and the man was simply gone. Adrian watched him cross to his wife, watched her whole face open at the sight of him, and felt the thing he always felt at these moments, which was nothing he had a clean word for. Not envy. You couldn't envy a country you'd never been issued a passport to. He turned back to his orchestra and played out the rest of the song. It was the planner who broke his rhythm. He'd registered her early. You didn't survey a room this size without clocking the one person actually holding it up, and she'd been holding it up all night. A woman in a sharp dark suit moving along the margins with a clipboard and an earpiece, and the specific scorched calm of someone keeping a great many plates in the air. He'd filed her the way he filed the exits and the load-bearing egos, and which senator was 3 drinks from an incident. Professional. Competent. Filed. Then, somewhere around the auction, he'd felt her looking at him. Not the way the room looked at him, which was the way you look at a warm fire. The way he looked at the room. Diagnostically. Reading the seams. He'd glanced up and met it, and there had been a half-second in which neither of them performed. Adrian had had the genuinely disorienting experience of being seen, not the face, the wires behind the face, by a total stranger across 100 feet of marble. She wasn't impressed. She wasn't charmed. She had looked at the finest lie he owned and recognized the craftsmanship. One forger nodding at another's signature. Something in his chest had done a thing it hadn't done in a very long time, which was move. He dropped the visor again out of pure reflex and tipped his head to her, caught, and she'd gone back to her plates, and he to his fire. For the rest of the night, he had known exactly where she stood in the room, and had been very careful never to go near her. The way you keep your hand off a wire you've been warned is live. He told himself it was nothing. He was extremely practiced at telling himself things. The wrongness was a separate matter, and it was the wrongness, in the end, that sent him toward the corridor. 3 times, in the last fortnight, he'd had the back of the neck certainty of being watched. Not the warm fire attention the face man always drew, but the cold, patient, cataloging attention of a professional. Once outside the Levine Tower. Once at the trust lawyer's office. Twice tonight, from somewhere past the auction lights. It was very likely nothing. A man in his world saw chess in a dropped fork. But the Brotherhood had learned in a war what it cost to wave off the things that sat wrong. And this sat exactly wrong. In the particular way of someone running a method Adrian recognized, because it was one of theirs. He filed it under watch, the way he filed everything, and went looking for 30 seconds in which he didn't have to be charming at anyone. He found them in a service corridor behind a column, where the planner stood with her forehead against the marble and a phone to her ear, losing the worst conversation he'd had the misfortune to overhear in years. He hadn't meant to listen. He'd meant to retreat, but the words came anyway. As things stand, you're going to lose her. And then her voice, scraped to the wire. He doesn't even want her. It's about the money. And then the lawyer. brutal, and kind at once. If you walked in there married, it's a different hearing entirely. It might be the only different hearing. Married. Adrian stood very still in the dark and listened to a stranger lose a child to a man who wanted an insurance account, and felt, underneath the reflexive sympathy, a much older and stranger thing click into place. The clean click of a problem, finding its only key. She needed a husband. Fast. And would let no one rescue her. He could hear that too, in the way she'd snapped handled at a thing that was the precise opposite of handled. He needed a wife. Inside 11 days. And one who would never, under any circumstances, fall in love with him. Because the single thing Adrian Cole could not survive was being kept long enough for someone to reach the hollow place and leave. A woman who already knew exactly what he was, who had looked at his very best smile and seen the wires behind it, and wanted not one single thing that lived back there. It was the most reckless idea he'd had in a decade. And he was already moving toward it. Because some buried animal part of him had wanted, from the moment she saw through him across that ballroom, to walk straight into being seen and find out whether it killed him. He picked up 2 glasses of water from the abandoned bar without quite deciding to. He noticed them, the way you notice you've been holding your breath. One for himself. One already poured for a woman who hadn't asked. Because providing the thing before it was requested was the only language his particular damage had ever learned to speak. He came around the column, into the dark. "You should sit down," he said. "Before you go, if this story pulled you in, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. That's how you'll know the second the next book arrives. And if you can't wait to find out what happens between Adrian and Sloane, everything you need to read the entire book is waiting in the description below. I'll see you in the next chapter.